begin our program right now. I'll humbly request, please muted your phone. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here for a seminar, and then this seminar is actually we have a two-part. First session will be conducted by Mr. Shaban Mahmood, our one of our organizers. He is a director of Institute for Strategic Dialogue. I would request Mr. Shaban Mahmood to come here and then start the program.
Thank you everyone who have been assembled here. I welcome everyone. Perhaps you know that which program we have arranged here. The executive editor of Institute for for Strategic Dialogue, Ms. Lopa, has already described. Distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, the members of praise and delegation. You know that Bangladesh is passing very crucial time. The community of journalists and the professional bodies are now totally insecure. Look into Bangladesh, then you will see the journalist community is under severe pressure. The professional journalists, the members of media is increasingly targeted, and sometimes the interim government have filed cases, false cases against them. Someone is in prison for the honest reporting, and the democratic political parties are now also under severe pressure. The citizens could not express their opinion freely. In this context, we expect freedom of speech, the inclusive, free and fair national parliament election, and defending humanity, and we expect the democratic political environment in Bangladesh. So we have arranged this program. Now let me allow to introduce the members and organizers of Institute for Strategic Dialogue. I would like to introduce the president of newly formed Institute for Strategic Dialogue, ISD. Our president is Mr. Dastogir Jahangir. I would like to introduce you before this meeting. Our former Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, Mr. A.K. Abdul Momin, has already arrived. He will speak something or deliver something regarding the context of Bangladesh. Our Dastogir Jahangir, now his very familiar face to the viewers and the readers. He is a very renowned journalist. He is the representative of White House, especially press briefing, and he is the editor of The Voice, and actually he will preside the meeting today. Now, I would like to introduce with you another director now, and she is the executive director of ISD, Miss Lopa, Shaila Ahmed Lopa. She is very known podcaster, and she is basically uh, fighting and defending the human rights. She has a uh, very renowned uh, human rights organization based on Canada and Toronto. Toronto, and now she's actually actively working to restore the democracy in Bangladesh, and she is always try to express her opinion, to create the opinion, and she is actually trying to explore the remaining very critical situation in Bangladesh. And another one is the former press minister in Washington, Bangladesh High Commission, Mr. Shahjad Hossein Shobuz. Now, right now, he is uh, out of this program. Probably he's at now he's with the former foreign minister Eke Abdul Momen. So uh, I would like to hand over this microphone to Shaila Ahmed Lopa, who will actually brief describely and the background of Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and she will just brief about the 2 days seminar, the democracy on the an election without Awami League, democracy on the AIDS, Bangladesh 2026. And you know that the keynote speaker has already been here. He is Michael Rubin. Rubin. He is very famous across the world for his good performance and defending the human rights. So please, Lopa, you just start your session.
Thank you, Mr. Shaban. Thank you, everyone, distinguished guests, honored speakers, and member of press, and our colleagues. On behalf of Institution for Strategic Dialogue, it is my privilege to welcome you to today's seminar, Bangladesh to 2026, Democracy on the Edge. I'll introduce our honorable guest today. Just if you can raise your hand when I pronounce the name. Mr. Dastagir Jahangir, he's the chair of this session, and then he's our president. Our keynote speaker, Honorable Mr. Michael Rubin, Senior Fellow, American Enterprise Institute. Dr. Nurun Nabi, he's a freedom fighter, councilman, and a human rights activist. Dr. A.K.M. Abdul Momen, former Foreign Affairs Minister and permanent representative of Bangladesh to United Nations. He is here. He is to be arrive within a minute. And we have, I'm not sure, Mr. Shirajul Alam. He's security analyst. Uh, he's here with us. Mr. Mohammad Alamgir, attorney at law, and Mr. Dilip Nath, Democratic Party. We're waiting for him, for them. Is Mr. Dilip Nath here? No, maybe he will arrive soon. And I will, I want to, like, just before I go for the main program to the main program, I want to briefly introduce what is ISD, Institute for Strategic Dialogue. What we're gonna do. Institute for Strategic Dialogue is a policy oriented platform committed to supporting democratic governance, advancing human rights, and encouraging informed, evidence based political dialogue across region. ISD engage with the policy community, diplomatic mission, and international institution in Washington, D.C., Canada, and other global capitals to facilitate constructive exchange on governance, institutional development, and political reform. Our mission is to serve a bridge between developed and developing country, fostering cooperation that support good governance, sound policymaking, and principled advocacy. Thank you, Mr. Momin. Uh, he's here. Uh, and then our work is guided by the principle, and which is, you can see it in our slogan, breaching ideas, shaping future. Ladies and gentlemen, why we are here today? I want to brief you. Bangladesh is facing a multi-layered democratic and civil crisis that extend for beyond press freedom. Repression now affects political actors, professionals, educators, civil servant, student, and journalist through intimidation, surveillance, and arbitrary detention. Over, let me tell you, over 11,000 students are reportedly locked out from classroom, many in hiding, with registration cancelled and future at risk. Civic space is shrinking. Dissent is increasingly criminalized, academic freedom curtailed, and independent thought punished, particularly in the lead up of in national election from which the Awami League and the 14 party alliance remain excluded. Today's discussion is not about partisan politics. It is about democratic principle, mostly international institutional resilience and international responsibilities. That's why we arrange this seminar. As a moderator, I'll ensure a balanced, respectful, and substantive exchange among our speakers while connecting their insight to global democratic standard and policy consideration. Now, to formally open today's session, it is my honor to invite Mr. Dastagir Jahangir, a President, Institution for Strategic Dialogue, and the editor of The Voice. He is the chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jahangir.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, member of press, colleagues, and friends. Good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, it is my honor to welcome you to today's policy forum, Bangladesh 2026, Democracy on the Edge, here at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. We are grateful to the National Press Club for hosting us and to all of you for taking the time to join this important conversation. This discussion comes at a critical moment for Bangladesh. The country is approaching a national election under extraordinary circumstances without the participation of the Awami League. Amid deep political uncertainty and against a backdrop of serious human rights concern, questions of democratic legitimacy, rule of law, and the safety of minority communities are no longer abstract issues. They are immediate, real, and consequential, not only for Bangladesh. I repeat it, it's not only for Bangladesh, but for regional stability and international democratic norms. Dear friends, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue was founded to create spaces like this today, spaces where difficult questions can be examined openly, respectfully, and rigorously. We believe dialogue grounded in facts, law, and human rights is essential, especially when democratic systems are under stress, like in Bangladesh today. We are honored to be joined by an outstanding panel today. I'll just mention our keynote speaker, everybody knows, Michael Rubin. Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, brings decades of experience analyzing governance, security, and democratic transition. His insight into South Asia and global democratic backslide are widely respected. Please welcome Michael Rubin. We are also privileged to hear from Dr. Nurun Nabi, a freedom fighter, councilman, and human rights activist. Those lifelong work they reflect the values of Bangladesh liberation struggle. Dr. Nurun Nabi, the freedom fighter. We welcome Dr. AKM Abdul Momen, former foreign minister of Bangladesh and former permanent representative to the United Nations, whose diplomatic experience offers critical perspective on Bangladesh international standing. I would also like to recognize Shaila Ahmed Lopa, Executive Director of the Institute of Strategic Dialogue and Humanity First Alliance, Canada, who will moderate today's discussion. And I also want to introduce AGM Sajjad Hussain Sobuj, Vice President of ISD, who will offer a vote of thanks. As journalists, policymakers, scholars, and members of civil society, we all share a responsibility to engage honestly with uncomfortable realities. Today's discussion is not about partisan positions. It is about democratic principles, human dignity, and the future of nation that holds deep historical and strategic significance. Thank you again for being here. I look forward to a thoughtful and substantive discussion. With that, I am pleased to begin today's program. Ms. Lopa. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say a few things about our keynote speaker, Mr. Michael Rubin. Mr. Michael Rubin has a consistent and outspoken voice on Bangladesh and on the countries who are is in crisis, who are is in problem, and then who are not recognized by the world or by the powerful parties around the world, and that he is raising his voice, his concern about democratic backlashing, political accountability, and the rise of extremist forces. Mr. Michael Rubin, Bangladesh people are very grateful to you. Thank you. And now our audience will hear for you. Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to Dr. Nabi, His Excellency, the Minister, Dr. Loba as well. It's an honor to be here today. I wish it was under more auspicious circumstances. As many of you know, my background isn't directly in Bangladesh, but I come to the region more as a comparativist, as someone who's been active and as a historian of the region more broadly. Now, when I look at US diplomatic history, let's put Republicans and Democrats aside. One thing that's consistent across administrations for more than 35 years is that the crisis, which no one saw coming during the campaign, is what ends up defining the president's national security and foreign policy legacy. So for George H.W. Bush, it was Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. That wasn't on the radar when he took over as president. For Bill Clinton, it was the breakup of Yugoslavia and then Kosovo. Again, not something that was ever talked about in the campaign. We all remember that George W. Bush came into office as a domestic president. And George W. Bush, of course, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, was confronted by Afghanistan, and then much more controversially, Iraq. Barack Obama promised to end quote unquote stupid wars. And not only did he remain in Afghanistan and Iraq at the end of his term, despite a brief pullout from Iraq, but he had also gotten involved in Syria and Libya. Again, crises which people didn't see coming. And so it is when we look at, and for Joe Biden, of course, Ukraine. When it comes to Donald Trump, he may not realize it, but the crisis which is now looming, and which in many ways seems to be almost like a slow motion train wreck, is what's happening in Bangladesh and the inability of the United States to think proactively about what's actually going on. I mean, let's just look at what happened in July and August of 2024. What we now know, of course, is that the protests which we saw were not organic. We've seen a similar playbook that's been used in places like Turkey, with similar evidence showing what the playbook is in terms of what is alleged to be an organic movement ends up being exposed by the forensics of ballistic forensics over falsehoods between or inconsistencies between press accounts, naive press accounts, as to who was behind some of the violence versus the physical evidence after the fact. But once the first draft of history is written, it doesn't matter if the bullets which are extracted from some people's bodies show that this had much more to do in Bangladesh's case with Jamaat-e-Islami and provocateurs than it actually did with some of the security forces that took the blame. Now, this isn't to say that the security forces had completely clean hands, but the narratives which are often presented by the press and perhaps naively by journalists reacting to official statements aren't necessarily the truth of the matter. But again, in our world that's defined by tweets or by 700-word news accounts, we oftentimes aren't in a position to understand the falsehoods which we're hearing or to correct the matters when policy decisions are being made upon those falsehoods. But what really strikes me is the banning of the Awami League. Again, I'm a historian, so I get paid to predict the past. When it comes to banning political parties, that really is a rarity. Now, we've had a situation throughout the Eastern Bloc, for example, where communist parties have been banned. Or we've had situations where racist parties, like Golden Dawn in Greece, have been banned. The United States itself in the 1950s had banned the American Communist Party. But when it comes to nonviolent, legal, and genuinely popular political parties, that are banned, I can only really think of two examples. One is the serial banning of Kurdish parties in Turkey. And I'm not talking about the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. I'm talking about many of the nonviolent Kurdish parties that adhere to the Constitution, and their main sin has been becoming too popular and therefore exposing the lack of popularity of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the dictator of Turkey. Now, and just as an aside for Turkey, to understand how much Turkey has changed, there's the old joke which I've used on a few other occasions, about a Turkish professor who makes the wrong tweet. And he ends up, after making his wrong tweet, with a 20-year prison sentence. And he goes into prison. And on his first day, he goes to the prison library because, of course, he has 20 years, a lot of time to kill. And he gives the prison librarian a list of books. And he asks for any of these books. And the prison librarian looks over the list and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We don't have any of these books. We only have the authors." And unfortunately, that's now the situation in Turkey. And that's quickly becoming the situation in Bangladesh under Muhammad Yunus. Now, if you have an election go forward and ascribed with any legitimacy when a party like the Awami League is banned, then in effect, what you're talking about is an election akin to what we've seen in the past in the Soviet Union or in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where in the Soviet Union, you could have elections, but only Central Committee members of the Soviet Union could run, members of the Communist Party and so forth. And in Iran, you also have elections, which are pre-screened by Islamic oversight, the Guardian Council, the Supreme Leader, and so forth. And to ascribe any legitimacy to those elections is, simply wrong. Now, when it comes to this notion of banning the Awami League, the Muhammad Yunus can argue that the ban is justified in terms of the narrative which he wants to promote. But putting aside his long-standing personal grievances, if you are banning a party like the Awami League, what you are really doing is projecting fear and projecting your own illegitimacy. The Awami League is far from perfect. Let's make no mistake there. But it represents a vision, a serious vision. And if Muhammad Yunus and Jamaat-e-Islami don't believe, if they believe that they could defeat the Awami League in free and fair polls, there would be absolutely no reason to ban the political party. The fact that they do seek to ban the political party suggests that they understand that they represent an unpopular ideology which cannot be legitimized at the polls. Now, this also brings us to issues of religion. It would be wrong to ascribe the problem to Islam, of course, the majority religion of Bangladesh. But it's important to understand that the difference between Islamists and Muslims are that Muslims practice a long-standing and sincere faith. It's a personal faith between them and God. But Islamists like to impose their vision and their narrow exegesis, their narrow interpretations upon others. And this is why they don't necessarily want to use the polls as a mechanism for legitimacy, because ultimately they don't believe in democracy. They believe in imposing their will and imposing their vision by whatever mechanism they can. And reminded, of course, of that famous quote by Recep Tayyip Erdogan when he was mayor of Istanbul, that democracy is like a streetcar. You ride it as far as you need, and then you step off. And that is exactly what we are seeing in terms of Bangladesh today. Now, we are in a situation where we are having a false narrative, as I said before, shaped by lazy, if not corrupted journalism. And we've seen this before when it comes to the Iranian Revolution, which some of us were talking about before. The Shah, of course, was a dictator. And many people who rallied around Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini were motivated not by their love of Khomeini, but rather by their hatred or their opposition to the Shah. As a historian, it's actually quite interesting to think about the Islamic Revolution because 10% of the Iranian public took part in the Islamic Revolution. This is the age before social media. In comparison, only 2% of Russians took part in the Bolshevik Revolution, 2% of Frenchmen took part in the French Revolution, and only 1% of Americans or colonists took part in the American Revolution. So we had a mass movement in Iran, but they were unified by what they were against rather than what they were for, rather than new vision. And Ayatollah Khomeini played this masterfully. Of course, he had his own vision, but when he came to France for his final months of exile, he opened the door to any numbers of journalists who would rush to interview him. And he made all sorts of statements. I have no interest in personal power. All I want is an Islamic democracy, that the people will choose the form of government. And that was something which Western progressives, Western liberals, and many in the State Department itself, they lapped it up. And if you look at the former Carter administration national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, in his book after Carter left office, Power and Principle, he talks about how the rank and file within the State Department were absolutely hostile to the Shah and in many ways welcoming to Khomeini, not fully recognizing what Khomeini stood for. Now, when Khomeini returned on February 1st, 1979, he started giving speeches in Qom, the Shia shrine city inside Iran. I mean, you have Mashhad, you have Qom as well. And he told students at seminaries in Qom that under no circumstances should democracy be a consideration, and that only those who ascribed to the Islamic system, to Vilayat al-Faqih, should have the right to vote. Therefore, again, we're going back to this notion of limiting elections in order to ensure that your particular vision wins, and at the same time, treating the Western press almost as useful idiots in order to project a false image while you slowly consolidate power in another direction. We've had similar situations, not only with Khomeini, but with a false narrative promoted by the Western press, which drives policy in Washington, in Europe, and in elsewhere. So one place where I tend to spend a lot of time is in the Great Lakes region of Africa. I've spent time in the Democratic Republic of Congo, both in the government area, but as some of you know, I also embedded myself with M23, the insurgent group, having snuck into their territory from Uganda. And I spent time in Rwanda and so forth. And we often hear, with regard to what occurs between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, a conflict which over the course of 2 wars in Central Africa has claimed millions, upwards of 5 million lives. That the narrative is that, for example, Rwanda is exploiting the hardwood of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is something which is often repeated by universities, it's often repeated by journalists, it's reported by human rights groups. The problem is, how do you get hardwood out of a jungle when there's no woods, when there's no roads? And so you've had subsequent studies done by journalists and elsewhere, years after this narrative was established, that determined, you know what? There wasn't actually the hardwood smuggling, which some academics said there was. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International talked about how some of the forces in the region were kidnapping and burning bodies, that they had killed 2,000. And when people challenged, where are the bodies? The answer was, well, the rebels or government forces, I forget which it was at the time, must have consumed the bodies with campfires. But you need to have fires upwards of 2,000, 3,000 degrees to destroy bone. And therefore, it was absolute nonsense. I mean, basically a tale that was being told to people because the people telling the tale wanted to pursue an agenda, and the journalists to whom the tale was being told wanted to receive that agenda, or they were so brought into the narrative that they never bothered questioning it or fact-checking it. One more example. I mean, when people talk about how the Rwandans have invaded and are occupying portions of Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, my question always is, and I've said this to the Congolese when I've been in Kinshasa, have you ever captured a Rwandan soldier or presented the body of a dead Rwandan soldier? And the answer is no. And then that's not to say the Rwandans aren't to blame. And it's not to say that the Congolese don't have grievances. But we're living in a world of exaggerations, and seldom do people actually step back to check. Now, for those of you who have ever been in an American embassy, you know what a fortress it is. One of the problems we have, and this is certainly the case in Dhaka, I just came back from Baghdad this weekend, and driving past the American embassy, it's absolutely preposterous. It's stunning how big this is, going on for blocks and blocks and blocks. But no one who is actually there is able easily to get outside of the embassy. Now, one thing that people don't realize, and I'll give the example of Beirut here, is during the Lebanese Civil War, we had American diplomats kidnapped. And because we had American diplomats kidnapped, certain security parameters were established on diplomats and their travel. And as a result of that, we have an officer in every embassy called a regional security officer, and their job is basically to keep the diplomats safe. The easiest way to keep diplomats safe is to keep them imprisoned. Now, you have that dynamic, so it's very hard for diplomats to actually get outside the embassy and see the reality of the societies which they're supposed to be reporting upon. Rather, there's a legacy of contacts that are passed from diplomat to diplomat, which may be guiding a narrative, which isn't necessarily always true. In the case of Lebanon, not only are American diplomats under severe constraint because you're not allowed outside the embassy and the embassy has been moved to the outskirts of town, but the US Embassy actually operates under the same security parameters that it did when Lebanon was in a civil war. So you have an irony where I can go to Beirut, take an Uber to the Corniche, grab a beer, grab a chicken shawarma, my normal routine, and walk along the Corniche to try to defeat jet lag. And no American diplomat over 1 or 2 years in Lebanon is allowed to do such a thing. Likewise, when I'm in Baghdad, and some of you know I've actually take my kids to Baghdad from time to time. It's bizarre traveling in Iraq with an 8-year-old daughter, but especially when she called an Ayatollah rabbi. He said, "I'm not a rabbi, I'm an Ayatollah." And she looked at him with all the diplomatic muster an 8-year-old could bring up and said, "Well, if you don't want to be called rabbi, you probably shouldn't dress like one." Didn't go over so well. At any rate, the point of this is, in a place like Dhaka, if the American embassy is only talking to students from or labor union officials, or perhaps other journalists, some of whom may have and do have other agendas, they're going to consider that person a primary source. They're not going to consider or have the self-reflection to understand that perhaps they are being used. And perhaps the journalist may or may not understand that he too is, or she too, are being used in the narrative which they're presenting. Once that narrative gets into the State Department, it's hard to shake loose. And of course, we have the same thing internally with our own Central Intelligence Agency. When I used to work in the Pentagon in the run-up to the Iraq War, and you would have dossiers, and this is no surprise, of various Iraqi figures, politicians, and so forth. And in certain cases, it was just from having known these people personally, it was just wrong, what languages they spoke and so forth. But the running joke was, if the person who wrote the dossier had met that figure once and that figure had a cold, the dossier permanently would talk about how they have a runny nose into perpetuity. Because once it's in that writing, if you're isolated and you're only looking at briefing papers, you're not able to correct the problems. Now, there's also a naivete within the State Department. And part of this is that the American there's two problems with the American approach to foreign policy in general, and this applies to the State Department as well. Number one, the American sense of history is usually only 4 or 8 years long. And therefore, and this is compounded by both Democrats and Republicans, when a new administration comes into power and believes that they can have a tabula rasa. They can start with a blank slate, and they're not going to be burdened by the baggage of previous American decisions or history. The other problem Americans have in general is we don't understand ideology, and especially religious ideology. I remember when I was a young Pentagon staffer in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and I would attend sometimes or prep people for National Security Council meetings and so forth. In Iraq, you have to deal with Shiism, you have to deal with Sunnism, you have to deal with various Christian denominations and so forth, let alone Yazidism and so forth. But in the United States, we wouldn't want to actually talk about religion or religious ideology because we have a separation of church and state. And therefore, somehow we internalize this notion that we have to project that separation onto our policy making. But in a place like Iraq, you can't ignore religion. Certainly the Iraqis don't ignore religion. But more generally, we seem to just be generally bad at ideology. And I would point out, for example, Donald Trump's Board of Peace in Gaza, where when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're a developer, everything's about buildings. But until you address the problem of the ideology in the Gaza Strip, it doesn't matter how many buildings you have. And when people say the ideology is just a fact of life, and nothing can be done to extract that ideology, my question to them as a historian is, would you say the same thing about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, which also controlled territory, which had a very noxious ideology, which ultimately was excised? Now, what we actually see, and we've seen this naivete in play most recently in the Washington Post story about the political officer at the U.S. Embassy in Dhaka who was trying to reach out to Jamaat-e-Islami and was doing so in a way which was cringeworthy and embarrassing. And I'll just put as a side note, it's a very good thing that story came out when it did, because now with the retraction of the Washington Post, the firing of the Washington Post's foreign correspondence, including the author of that story, it's quite possible that such a story would never have become known. So perhaps sometimes those who want more democracy, or at least more transparency, can be lucky that that story came out when it actually did. Now, the US certainly doesn't understand history. Very few Americans understand what happened in 1971, let alone before. I myself was born in 1971, so you look at how old I am, and anyone on the street who's younger than me, and everyone knows that in Congress, most everyone's in their 20s. They have absolutely no conception. This really, with what Jamaat-e-Islami is doing and what Muhammad Yunus is doing, is the first time I can really think of anyone having the power to relitigate history and to somehow launder genocide. I mean, in Rwanda, you don't have the genocidaire coming back to power. In Germany, as I said before, it's the racist parties, the Nazi parties, which are banned, not the popular big tent parties like the Awami League. But in the case of Bangladesh, there was a genocide. Jamaat-e-Islami were war criminals, or at least cheering on the war criminals. And Americans tend not to understand the actual historical conception of this. Now, unfortunately, I'll be a little bit critical with India that sometimes it seems that India, too, has some strategic confusion. I mean, when we look recently, for example, at the controversy over Somaliland and Somalia, Somaliland was a location, and I've been to Somaliland many, many times. In fact, also I've taken my kids there. Somaliland is a place that suffered genocide. The Siad Barre, during the Cold War, conducted a genocide against the Isaaq clan, killed perhaps 200,000. Now, Somaliland had been independent, but after this genocide and after this, they went into a union with Somalia. But after the genocide and after basically just the failure and the ideology and the extremism which they were seeing coming out of Mogadishu, they decided to dissolve the union, much like Senegal and Gambia did, much like Egypt and Syria did with the United Arab Republic. But by India making the argument that Somaliland, the victim of genocide and a country that in 1960 had been recognized by all 5 members of the UN Security Council, must somehow remain part of Somalia, undermines the moral undermines the moral stand which India should be taking on Bangladesh at a time when Jamaat-e-Islami, backed by Pakistan, is trying to reverse what happened, what people like Dr. Nabi had fought for, which was the rights and the freedom of Bangladesh. And we need to recognize and conceive that what we are seeing right now isn't a vision of tolerance. It's actually trying to reverse that freedom and that liberty under the false guise of democracy when it's anything but. I mean, I would actually say that the Norwegian Nobel Committee has a great deal to answer for, and they tend not to learn their lessons. So what we're seeing with Muhammad Yunus right now, and the cynicism which he is exhibiting, isn't so different from what we've seen in Burma with Aung San Suu Kyi, excuse my pronunciation, and the fact that when push came to shove, she wasn't able to escape from her ideological hatreds. Or Tawakkol Karman. If you remember, before Malala had become a Nobel laureate, we had a Muslim Brotherhood acolyte from Yemen, the daughter of one of the Muslim Brotherhood leaders, Tawakkol Karman, who became a Nobel laureate. And when you have slaughters of anyone who is not a Muslim, she is resoundingly silent. She lives in Turkey today. And perhaps, I mean, you won't hear her speaking up against for the Kurds. You won't hear her speaking up for the Yazidis. If someone kills a Muslim Brotherhood acolyte, she will be all over it. But there's not a consistency of principle. It's all about political cynicism. And that is what we see from Muhammad Yunus today as well. Now, what I would actually say is when we are relitigating what happened in 1971, you're actually, I mean, what the United States is being party to, whether it knows it or not, is by laundering and erasing the genocide, what they are doing is really giving a sense and a inspiration to those that would want to do that elsewhere. What happens in Bangladesh won't stay in Bangladesh. Now, the last point I would make is that we are naive to believe that this is, again, only about Bangladesh. This is about those in Islamabad who don't see and don't recognize Bangladesh. What they see is East Pakistan. Now, we see this because the Pakistani government has agreed to fund the campaign of the student-led National Citizens Party, which is an alliance with Jamaat-e-Islami. That's something which has been circulating around for some time. It hasn't made the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post now, but the evidence with regard to Pakistani funding of the National Citizen Party is rock solid. And it's one of these issues that deserves much more attention than it is getting. But if we wait until after February 12th, or if the State Department, in any sort of knee-jerk algorithm-defined statement, gives any legitimacy to the elections on February 12th, it will be making a huge mistake. Now, my final point before turning the floor over has to do with religious liberty. And again, as many of you know, I spent time in Afghanistan, I spent time in Iraq, in Syria as well. I spent time in Raqqa, which was the capital of the Islamic State, in Mosul as well. And one of the things that people forget, number one, we can put any patina and project any sort of goodwill. We can launder the image of intolerant Islamist governments. And we could pretend that someone like Ahmed al-Shara in Syria is truly changed his ideology when he shaved his beard or trimmed his beard and put on a suit. The fact of the matter is ideology doesn't work that way. I would argue, whether we're talking the Islamic Republic of Iran, whether we're talking the People's Republic of China, or any other country, the way you can tell whether reform is sincere or not is in terms of respect for religious liberty. And when I'm talking about respect for religious liberty in Bangladesh, I'm not simply talking about the minority communities in Bangladesh, even though we've seen that the Awami League has especially targeted some of those who have been standing up and defending the minority communities in Bangladesh. Not the Awami League, the interim government has been targeting the Awami League officials who have been protecting the minorities in Bangladesh. But one thing that became clear to me when I'm in Iraq, when I lived in the Islamic Republic of Iran, when I was in Afghanistan and so forth, is, of course, while we don't want to talk about Islamic terrorism in the United States because someone will accuse us of being Islamophobic, within these countries, people will readily talk about Islamic terrorism because they recognize that what is going on is not a castigation of religion. It is a debate within religion where one side of that debate is willing to use religion, hijack religion, for the sake of terrorism. And when it comes to Iraq, for example, with regard to the Islamic State, we hear about the Yazidis, we hear about the Christians, and even the Shia who were able to flee the Islamic State. But the people who do the most dying at the hands of Islamist radicalism are Muslims themselves, Sunni Muslims, especially in the case of Iraq, because the people the Islamic State was executing for smoking cigarettes, for watching football games or such, throwing off buildings because they were suspected of being gay, those were Sunni Muslims. When we talk in the United States defense concept about green on blue violence, where someone we were training would turn their guns on their trainers, what we often ignored is the rate of green on green violence was 3 times as high as people who would infiltrate would kill their Afghan brethren in the name of religion. And the same thing is going to be true with Jamaat-e-Islami. The fact of the matter is, if you want to judge whether Jamaat-e-Islami has changed since 1971, all you need to do is look at their record towards anyone who does not worship the same way they do, whether they are Muslim or whether they are a non-Muslim. And when you go by that test, you see that Jamaat-e-Islami are the same old war criminals, the same old Islamists, and they believe that they can pull a fast one on the outside world and turn Bangladesh into a fundamentally different state. I will just conclude with this. In 1992, Edward Dirigian, who was at the time the Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, wanted to explain why the United States didn't recognize the outcome of the Algerian election in 1991. And the way he put it was this: we believe in one man, one vote. We do not believe in one man, one vote, one time. And that is exactly what Muhammad Yunus's and Jamaat-e-Islami's vision is for the future. It needs to be stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. I kindly request an honored guest to keep their remark brief so that we can move to the question answer session. Now, I'll request to say something our honorable guest, uh, Dr. Nurun Nabi, freedom fighter, councilman, and human rights activist. Mr. Nurun Nabi, floor is yours. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm a scientist by training, so I always speak very briefly. That's the role of scientist. So today I will make a couple of points, especially the speech given by keynote speaker Michael Rubin and my own comments. And then we'll talk about Dr. Muhammad Yunus, criminal of Bangladesh and criminal of the world, and he is the war criminal, human rights violator, corrupt people, corrupt persons, and his regime. So these are the 3 points I will briefly touch. First of all, Michael, thank you very much for your inspiring speech, in a sense that being an American, you know what is going on in Bangladesh. As a freedom fighter, I keep in touch with the Bangladesh people. I know what is going on. Why not the State Department, White House, Congress, Senate? They don't understand what is going on in Bangladesh. That's a question, not to anybody, to myself. I am being a American, a Bangladeshi American, a councilman. I really don't understand why you mentioned why they are doing their mistake not once. Every time when there is a regime change, they have a role in negative way in Afghanistan, in Vietnam, in Iraq, Iran, Libya, and finally, what they are doing in Bangladesh is really unbelievable, unacceptable, and it's a kind of confusion that American administration, American Congress, Senate, they are confused about the world, not only about Bangladesh. So my brief comment about your keynote speech, especially I follow your speech from March 2005 to January 2026. You have urged the Trump administration to radically change US policy towards Bangladesh. You strongly urged against continuing policies of the Biden administration, describing the situation in Bangladesh a slow motion cop. This is your first point, and also today, whatever you mentioned, I 100% agree with you, more than 100%. So my question remains that why American administration, American people don't understand. So what you mentioned during last couple of months and also today's speech, these are the 5 points I want all of you, especially my journalist friend, to take home these 5 messages. What Michael Rubin mentioned about Bangladesh. I'm not going to analyze his analysis of Bangladesh. I will just mention what my take home, and I want you to remember those things. Number 1, Michael mentioned that you rightfully mentioned that President Trump and Secretary of State Mark Rubio to sanction against Muhammad Yunus. And I will describe later who is Muhammad Yunus. The head of the Bangladesh interim government, you accused him complicity in the persecution of minorities and imprisonment of journalists and all political opponents. This is his first take-home message I want you remember. Second, opposing Islamist rule. You have warned that current US policy is enabling growing Islamist rule. So not only Yunus, US policy also enabling Islamist rule in Bangladesh. This is very important point. Michael, I thank you because this is the root of all cause of all evils in what is going in Bangladesh. Third, reassessing Sheikh Hasina's role in Bangladesh politics. Who is Sheikh Hasina? She is the president of Awami League. She is the daughter of founding father Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He ruled the country, Bangladesh, for almost 17 years to 18 years. And what did she do? She made Bangladesh a role model of economic development. And it is not my rhetoric, it is not her claim, it is recognized by world community, IMF, World Bank, etc. So you recommended that Sheikh Hasina should be the relevant in Bangladesh politics. And why you mentioned, and I agree with you, is that Trump administration should reconsider re-evaluating its stance on the exiled former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. You suggested that Awami League should have equal and legal status in future elections rather than being eliminated from the political landscape. You discussed it in detail. I don't want to, but this is also the topics of today's why Awami League is not a part of the election. A simple high school student know what is the definition of national election. Through this, majority of the people select who will govern that country. And in Bangladesh, currently, Awami League has 70 to 80% support. And the political party who is established, whose leader, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, established Bangladesh. During those political movement, this liberation movement, liberation war, I had the opportunity to participate as an activist. Liberation movement, liberation war. And that party is banned from the election. It is not democracy. Why West is silent about this issue? They don't clearly say, including United States, that the Awami League should participate in the national election. Without Awami League, there will be no national election, no democratic government, or no democracy will be established. This simple message. American administration, they say we want inclusive election. And their definition is election, it changes every day. That today is majority of the people, but never say that a majority political party is not a party, it is banned illegally. This government has no authority to ban any political party. Michael analyzed these points very clearly, so I don't want to waste on time. So this fourth point, the third point, that Sheikh Hasina should be reevaluated, and maybe I can rephrase it. You also suggested that she should be reinstated as a prime minister to solve the current crisis. Only she can establish democracy. Only she can establish the principle of liberation, liberation movement, liberation principles. And fourth point is that preventing the failed state, that Yunus is trying to establish Bangladesh, or leading to Bangladesh to a failed state. US can prevent this if they wish, if they want. You just remind them. The last and fifth point I want you to take home is that you have called United States to designate Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islam as a terrorist group. This is very important message which Michael recommended. I agree. And 90% people of Bangladesh, though 90% population in Bangladesh are Muslim, but they are liberal Muslim, they don't support terrorism. But what this Jamaat-e-Islam during 16 months did in Bangladesh, they have transformed Bangladesh into a Islamist terrorist state. They don't believe in democracy. Terrorism and democracy doesn't go together. So these 5 recommendations of Michael, I wholehearted support. And people of Bangladesh, 90% people, I believe, they support it. And this is the solution America should pursue. Why I'm urging America? Because America, United Nations, European country, Turkey, Qatar, these are the countries they are involved to overthrow Sheikh Hasina. I know Bangladesh ins and outs. No popular uprising could not overthrow Sheikh Hasina. It was possible only through a conspiracy of these countries I mentioned, and also local conspiracy like Jamaat, Shibir, and others. It was possible because false narrative was created. And it's not just false narrative. Money was used. Donald Trump said that last year, 2024, only from one agency, $50 million were spent. There are two other agencies, IRI and also the deep state. So if we combine all this money, millions of dollars were invested in Bangladesh, hired terrorists, hired Tokai, we call this street boy, hired intellectuals and military. Finally, I'll finish soon. Finally, I mentioned about United States, UN Human Rights Commissioner, Turk, possibly Volker Turk. He called the military that he should not support a legally you should not support a legally elected government. You should not, rather you support the terrorist or the mob. And by this threat, possibly he mobilized Bangladesh military in favor against the government. The reason I'm mentioning this is my last point is that, as I mentioned, no political uprising, no political movement could overthrow Bangladesh the way it was done in 2024 July August, because it was possible. Only the army, Bangladesh army, betrayed, and they participated, or they became the part of a conspiracy. So these are my analysis about current situation in Bangladesh with the help of Michael Rubin. And last point about Yunus, I hate to mention his name, and my parents never taught to use bad language against anybody. But as a freedom fighter and following the current situation, I have to mention that simply just one line, that Yunus is a corrupt person. He is a human rights violator. He is sponsoring the Islamist terrorism in Bangladesh with the state money, state power. So that's what Yunus is. Though West installed him in power believing that he will serve the purpose of West, especially United States, but in fact, he is not an ambassador of peace. He is an ambassador of violence. Sheikh Hasina, former Prime Minister, developed Bangladesh into an economic role development. And Yunus, you mentioned, he made Bangladesh a failed state. So please take home this message. And I thank ISD for inviting me and allowing the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Novi. Actually, we have to, because Mr. Rubin have to leave because he will have to go to pick up his children. So I'll open the floor for question and answer, and then I'll go next to Mr. Abdul Moment. First, I'll open the floor for question and answer. If you guys have any question to Mr. Rubin, please. No.
Uh, Mr. Rubin will have maybe say 10 questions to answer, let's say. So first, I go to New York. Please, go ahead.
Do you have extra
Yeah, you can
extra
answer.
microphone?
My clear question is: do America believe a democracy where Dr. Mohamed Yunus illegally conducting an election where majority party and majority people is not participating or voting the party? Do America support this democracy or election?
Thank you so much.
It's about 60% voter will not be present. Do you think American democracy or American government will support this election? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We want to give everybody chance. You will raise your hand, and I will let you go to get the answer. Thank you.
The short answer is hopefully not. You're absolutely right at pointing out the hypocrisy which is slowly unfolding. My concern is that those who are making the decisions with regard to how to react don't know the details and therefore may fall into a trap of prescribing false legitimacy on an illegitimate election.
Yes, Michael, Jamal.
Mr. Jamal.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
I don't need mic because I have not. Okay, Michael, this is Jamal Hassan. Like you, I also worked with the Central Command in theory, and I was deployed in Saudi Arabia. My team leader, Daryl Rees, was a Bangladesh watcher. And in 2018, he was always cautioning me, Jamal, what your Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is doing, the playing with snakes, for example, why kowtowing the Hepazat. And he always cautioned me someday these snakes would bite. do you agree with that notion, what Darrell Reed told me in 2018, that it was a mistake on Sheikh Hasina's part to appease Hifazat or certain section of the Islamist groups in Bangladesh?
The reason why I believe that, let me put it this way. Some people will look at democracy sincerely. Other people will look at democracy as a tool, almost as an asymmetric warfare strategy, where they will be willing to use legitimacy when they can receive it, but they're willing to use force and bullets when they can't win at the ballot box. What I worry about is appeasing anyone who is not sincere with regard to what democracy is and isn't willing to, let me put it this, that isn't sincere with regard to what democracy is. I mean, look, a chief case would be what I mentioned with regard to Algeria, the whole one man, one vote, one time issue. When it comes to Hezbollah or Hamas, you can't say that you are a legitimate political party if you also maintain a militia and try to win things through that force of arms. When it comes to Jamaat-e-Islami, you can't say that you're a legitimate political party if you're receiving funding and direction from outside the country which you claim to serve.
I was talking about Hifazat-e-Islam.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm just talking much more generally, that perhaps it's naive to appease anyone who isn't willing to play by a commonly understood rule book about democracy.
Mr. Norun Nabi, Paki, please, go ahead.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to say thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Gangebhai, to arrange the wonderful session today. And others, ex-Prime Minister, Mr. Abdul Mohammed, and others, my fellow, all the people that came all the way from New York and others. So, good evening. My question is Mr. Michael Rubin, your senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute. Am I right?
Yes.
Could you tell me about your organization and in this moment, how it can help how many can participate in the election and the current situation, how it can help us from your institute, please?
Well, I mean, my institute is an academic institute, so anyone who is there is someone who both has an academic background and has spent time on the ground. Therefore, look, we're not a lobby organization. We don't take U.S. government money. We don't take any foreign money. We're funded by donors. We're nonprofit. And by law, we can't lobby. What we can do is analyze. And what I will do is call it as I see it. And if someone chooses to see my writing and forward it to someone else, so be it. What I would argue, and this is something which I've argued in different contexts, if you feel strongly about the falsity of the forthcoming election and what Muhammad Yunus is doing and what Jamaat-e-Islami is doing, don't simply engage in Twitter conversations or online conversations with fellow Bangladeshis. What you want to do is write for a non-Bangladeshi audience. And one of the key recommendations I always make, because look, I've done my stint as an academic. I used to teach at universities. And one of the things that I mean, just to give one example, in, I believe, the New York Times, letters are at most 150 words. And sometimes I would see on an academic listserv, I sent this letter, I'm outraged. I sent this letter into the New York Times. They refused to print it. They were censoring me. This is the letter they refused to print. And there's a 2,000-word missive. When it wasn't rejected on the content, it was rejected because when someone says the limit is 150 words, the limit is 150 words. My point here is if you want to be successful getting published, in any non-Bangladeshi publication. What I always do is, number one, ask for the word count or determine the word count on my own. They're not going to make an exception for me. And I mimic as much as possible the style in which it's written. If US is written US without periods, that's how I do it. If it's U.S, U period S period, that's how I do it. If they abbreviate the month of the year, that's how I do it. Because let me give you an inside tip about Washington. Editors are lazy. And I'm an editor myself. And
Myself also, I'm not lazy.
but the point is, if you have submissions, and sometimes I'll have 5 or 6 submissions a day, the ones I'm going to get to first and get published first are the ones I have to do the least editing on that seem to be written the best. And so even though you asked how AEI could help, AEI can't help because we're basically like a university without teaching. We don't take institutional positions. There's no one that's going to help you other than you yourself. And my advice to you is to not write for an audience of yourselves, but to write for an outside audience. My other advice is when someone disagrees with you, don't demonize them. I think it was the late Anthony Scalia, the Supreme Court Justice, who says, I attack ideas, I don't attack people, because some very good people have bad ideas. The important thing is to try to convince someone that there's a better way or that they're incorrect without forcing them to dig their heels in and making it a personal issue.
Yes, thank you so much. Let me go to Zia Karim, please. Sure. And then you, and we'll go around.
As you mentioned that Jamaat Islami, their organization, they run in different names in different countries, Islamic Brotherhood or ISIS and different. In this country where we're standing, they run their organization as called MUNA, Muslim Ummah of North America. So what you can do, or as a American citizen, what we can do to where the lawmaker or the president or the White House to know this is a terrorist organization. So can we do something to ban them as a MUNA, as they are taking our money a lot of times, they're called Jakat money, and they're funding the Jamaat Islam. They have a lot of masjid around here, they call MUNA. And if you look at it, in 2004 July, they had a convention in Philadelphia. Every year they have convention in Philadelphia, where they are supporting vigorously the Jamaat and the Islamic extremists. Why in this country always let this thing happen, where the fundamentalists start from here in Washington?
Okay.
Why cannot we do something? What you can do?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for being brief and abrupt, but there's a 10-year-old wandering around the streets of Bethesda waiting for his dad to pick him up. So first of all, what I would say in short, and I'm not trying to punt on your question or avoid it, what you're talking about within the United States is not within my realm of expertise. However, I'm dual-hatted at an organization called the Middle East Forum. And the person who actually focuses on the issue, what specifically that you're touching upon, is a gentleman named Sam Westrop. And Sam Westrop, if you look up his writings, would be the person who could best answer that. Now, as a non-expert on the issue you're raising, the way to actually address some of these issues is with regard to the Internal Revenue Service, transparent. I mean, the first thing you got to do is ensure legally that people are fully transparent with regard to the sources of their money. If they're not, and if they're a nonprofit and their IRS Form 990s aren't accurate, that itself is a problem which has a criminal undertone. Then there's the issue about whether you simply lobby the government to cut off money, or whether you do, or to return money which has already been spent, or whether you engage in debarment, which is basically taking them off the list bureaucratically of who qualifies to receive money. There's a lot of bureaucratic levers that can be pulled on this. When it comes to some of the rhetoric about outlawing the Muslim Brotherhood, and if I can be blunt, the Muslim Brotherhood and Deobandi movements might appear similar, but at the same time, they're different. They come from different exegeses. Now, the point here is that it's hard to simply outlaw the Muslim Brotherhood because the Muslim Brotherhood can mean different things to different people. That's why you have to be very specific, as you were in your question, with regard to the affiliate or the organization. And then you have to be very precise with tracking, with demanding transparency, tracking their tax forms. And I would say that sometimes it's even worth joining the organization so that you have standing to demand that transparency from the inside.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On
One
two
more
more. Yeah.
Okay.
Two more questions. Go ahead.
Question?
Yeah.
So Nazarian, you want to say something?
I was going to say, Michael, you're brilliant, and I've had the honor of knowing Michael for over a decade, and everything you said is amazing, and you definitely are very rare because I know myself, I work on these issues regarding Bangladesh specifically, and I'm the Director of Communications Legislative Outreach for Hindu Action, so Michael's saying is true. I want to address, if it's okay, quickly,
Yeah.
also his comment. I actually worked on compiling a dossier, if you want to call it, regarding this specific issue of why the Jamaat-e-Islami and the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, right? President Trump did declare the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist organizations, Lebanon, Bahrain, and a few different countries. But in the U.S., the CARES, the ICNAs, the ISNAs, the MUNAs, they traditionally started out as Muslim Brotherhood aligned organizations. What they've done now is, due to sheer numbers of South Asians who are coming into the U.S. and actually have Jamaat-e-Islami allegiances, these organizations and groups are now actually specifically becoming supporters of Jamaat-e-Islami. So technically, the next kind of round of targets will be on Jamaat-e-Islami whenever that's supposed to happen. So happy to share the information regarding that. What Michael said is to reach out to, make sure editorial standards are adhered to, but also reaching out to your members of Congress. Write to them, make sure that you get people to also be actively civically engaged, critically important. And Michael, if I may ask you,
Yeah.
I may have to go.
Yeah.
What do you think will ultimately happen in Bangladesh with the elections?
Thank you.
What do you think will
That
happen?
is my question too.
Look, there's an old Soviet joke about an optimist and a pessimist. The old Russian pessimist is the one who said, things are so bad, war, economy, health, environment, they couldn't possibly get worse. And the Russian optimist is the one who says, no, they can always get worse. Look, wishful thinking would be that the United States isn't going to recognize the outcome of this election. What we see from the political officer, exposed in the Washington Post story on that tape recording of a meeting with students, is that the State Department doesn't seem to have gotten the message. And if Bangladesh isn't at the top of concern proactively, at the principal level, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Director of Central Intelligence, then basically the more junior levels of the State Department, of the Foreign Service, are able to essentially make their own policy, and we see that being played out in real time. I'm afraid that we're going to have the election. Of course, Jamaat is going to win simply because they don't have real competition. And then we're going to have some polite nonsense in the US State Department about congratulations on the election. There's one episode that I heard from the Bureau of African Affairs where when Mugabe died in Zimbabwe, there was people in the executive office of the Secretary of State put down notice that Robert Mugabe was responsible for a disaster and he had lots of blood on his hands. And the United States was not going to commemorate his death. But some low-level person in the Bureau of African Affairs sent out a statement. And Mike Pompeo demanded a new statement revoking that statement. If only, I would hope that this raises to the attention of Marco Rubio before we actually create impediments ourselves. But as Winston Churchill said, the Americans always do the right thing. They just try everything else first. And I'm afraid of how much damage is going to be done to Bangladesh and how much Bangladeshis are going to suffer until the Americans realize that we need to do the right thing.
Last question
What,
from the
what
young.
made you to think that Jamaat is going to win?
The answer is simply because when you outlaw the most popular parties, it's not a legitimate election. What makes me think that in the Soviet Union, the Communist Party would win? That's the analogy I would make.
But
Yeah,
there is
but-
another
Yeah,
popular party.
the young man. Yeah, last question.
I apologize for taking up your time. I know you have
Yeah.
a young child looking for you, but I want to ask very briefly. There is this in your speech and in your talk. You talked a lot about how there are some things that the U.S. Embassy and State Department is certainly not seeing, whether that be through naivete or institutional barriers, or how separated the embassy is from Dhaka and things like that. But to be very frank, there is this notion, both in online spaces and also a notion that is shared by many people in this room today, that it is not only naivete and it is not only institutional barriers that are the reason why the U.S. Embassy has failed to take certain actions in this case. As the previous speaker said, there are people who believe that the West has funded this, and there are historical connections between Muhammad Yunus and Bill Clinton, for instance, and there's a lot of talk. So my question is, do you have any comment on this sort of idea and this rhetoric in this circumstance?
Thank you so much. Can I have your name, please?
Raid Rana.
Look, the question is excellent, and I understand the frustration as well. All I can say is from anyone who's ever been inside the U.S. government and seen how the sausage is made will recognize that there's very little direction, and there's often confusion within the U.S. government. And because of that, some people putting their thumbs on the scale can tip the scale in a very specific direction. The general problem with U.S. policy, and this is something which I worked in the George W. Bush administration, but my equivalent in the Bill Clinton administration pointed this out. A gentleman named Brian Katulis, who's now, he was vice president, I think, of the Center for American Progress, is if you look back over the last 25 years, at least, there hasn't been coherence to American strategy. At best, we're reactive rather than proactive. And because of that, with a lack of proactiveness, with a lack of a common vision among Democrats and Republicans in Congress, you have a situation where the disaster happens, and then we try to dig ourselves out of the hole rather than avoiding the hole in the first place. So yes, I understand the frustration. I understand the way people look at IRI or National Endowment for Democracy, but I believe that a lot of this has to do with simply a lack of direction coming down from the State Department or from the National Security Council. In this case, it's Marco Rubio, one or the other.
Thank you. I just really wanted to hear something and hear a statement like that from someone who is an American with the internal knowledge of how these things work. I think oftentimes many of us don't really have that perspective, so it's very appreciated.
I mean, just in short, when it comes to the I think, look, American foreign policy has made many mistakes and many unforced errors over the years. Where I differ, and people can debate these, where I differ is when it comes to conspiracy theories, because when you have a government as big and bloated as the US government is, it's hard to get 5,000 people to keep a secret. And so oftentimes it's the simplest explanation, which is someone is making a mistake because they're naive, rather than this notion that there's some dark force that wants this to happen.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Rubin.
Thank you.
So, huge round of applause, Mr. Rubin. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. So, we have another honorable, respected guest, Greg Rushford, who worked for us, Rushford, right? Sorry. For us on Congress in support of 1971 independence.
What we want to say that we have another special
We
guest,
ha-
so
yeah.
nothing to lose about.
Nothing to
Yeah.
lose about. Please be seated. And then now I welcome to Mr. AKM Abdul Momen, our former Foreign Affairs Minister, and to say something. Floor is yours.
I thank Michael Rubin for his wonderful presentation, and he was very forthright. Unfortunately, he has gone. You can hear?
Yeah, we can hear.
For brevity, I'll not speak long. I will just read out from my speech, which have been distributed to all of you. I have two parts. One is I gave a total narrative of last 17 months. So you can see that I have already sent during your free time. You can look at it and see how things are happening. And I feel good that almost after 28 years, I'm in this room. In 1988, I was instrumental in organizing a special hearing on Bangladesh when there was a military government. And following 2 years, that government was wiped out. So again, I'm here after 28 years, and hopefully, corrective government will go. Now, for brevity, let me read my statement, which is in front of you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for conveying this timely discussion. Bangladesh is experiencing a profound political and governance crisis under an unelected interim administration. What we are witnessing is not routine political transition, but a serious erosion of constitutional order, rule of law, and civil security. I might add also, I have published a report last July, and if you leave your email, we can send, because somehow that report didn't come here. It's a pretty thick 89 page. I can send it through email. So if you leave your email address, we can send that. Until August 2024, Bangladesh had been on a steady development trajectory. Over the previous 15 years, the country averaged over 6.6% GDP growth rate, reduced poverty more significantly from 42% to 18%, expanded electricity access nationwide, achieved near universal primary school enrollment, and built a wide social protection network for the most vulnerable and deprived families. Bangladesh had become a recognized development model among Global South. That trajectory has now been sharply disrupted. Today, the country faces breakdown of law and order, widespread mob violence and insecurity, political repression and shrinking civic space, attacks on journalists and media institutions, targeting political opponents and minority communities, weakening of state institutions, including the judiciary and the law enforcement, severe economic disruption, job losses, and rising poverty. Citizens across the country report fear, uncertainty, and lack of protection. Resurgence of radical jihadis and terrorists that are overtaking the administration. I have a longer laundry list. I have in my summary paper. I have given 20 laundry list you can look into. 10, systematic repression of 3 groups of people, namely the Awami League supporters, the Mukti Juddhe Chetona, those who believe in it, and Hindu minority. In addition, wild and widespread lies, propaganda, false accusations, even by government agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, when state authority weakens, non-state actors and extremist elements fill the vacuum. This creates risks not only domestically, but regionally and globally. Of particular concern are, 1, radicalization of the government, and 2nd, the political process now underway. First, an election scheduled for 12th February is proceeding under conditions where major political actors are excluded. Opposition members face legal and administrative barriers, and confidence in institutional neutrality is deeply compromised. An election without broad participation cannot deliver legitimacy, stability, and recovery. The nation's largest political party, the Awami League, is willing to participate in the election provided it is free, fair, transparent, and inclusive under a non-partisan government. Third, at the same time, proposed structural and constitutional changes are being advanced in an environment where dissent is constrained and public trust is low. Reforms undertaken without inclusion and consensus risks deepening polarization rather than resolving it. Through a mysterious referendum in which 86 major issues involved, including granting indemnity to killers, the looting and arson, rape and extrajudicial killings, money laundering and graving properties, both public and private, destruction of institutions, and of course, rewriting the Constitution. I must add here, I have been a resident of Massachusetts for many, many years, 38 years. During this time, we have some referendum. One was on a 2.5 tax, where the maximum the government can charge 2.5% of tax, and either yes or no. Then another referendum, and that was initially Governor Mike Dukakis, gave an executive order that vehicle belt is mandatory. Then people didn't like it. So there was a referendum, and his decision was overthrown. But after a few years, again there was another referendum whether people liked the seat belt or not, and it was approved. So what I might like to mention is, whenever we have a referendum, the issue was very simple. 1 or 2 questions, and you will say yes or no. Here, there are 86 issues are involved, and these are major issues. And you know the Bangladeshi literacy rate, and you are asked to, and I am totally confused. So this is the sham referendum. Currently, Bangladesh is a secular state where all citizens have equal rights and opportunity, and before law.
Yes.
They would like to Islamize it, their own version of Islam, not true Islam. In fact, this referendum is designed to perpetuate their evil governance and deny people of their rights to have a free, fair, transparent, and inclusive election where all political parties and individuals, irrespective of their race, religion, ethnicity, color, or background, have equal rights to participate in the election. This is not a partisan matter or a particular political issue. It is about state stability, democratic legitimacy, and human security. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, we are thankful to the US and the UN as they decided not to send election observers to such a sham election.
That's correct. Good job.
We urge the other countries, especially the members of the European Union, the Commonwealth, the OIC, the African Union, NAM, LLDCs, SEEDS, to boycott this sham election publicly and announce it publicly. The international community has an important role to play. We respectfully urge governments, especially the United States, and multilateral institutions and human rights organizations to encourage, first, a genuinely inclusive, credible, and transparent electoral process open to all major political actors. Second, restoration of full political rights, including lifting restrictions on parties and candidates. Third, protection of journalists, civil society, and minority communities. Fourth, release of political detainees and due process under the rule of law. And finally, the fifth, a neutral administrative framework that can restore public confidence in governance. Bangladesh's long-term stability depends on democratic legitimacy, functioning institutions, and equal protection for all citizens. A descent into sustained instability of extremism would have consequences beyond our borders. The people of Bangladesh deserve security, dignity, and the right to choose their government through a fair and inclusive process. Thank you. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangla.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Momen. Please.
We have, you can announce, we have two more guests, Mr. Jamal Hussain and then last one.
Thank you so much. Let me tell you this. I'm so proud of being Bangladeshi Bengali right now, because I was not thinking that this kind of seminar, even somebody will have any interest. So everybody has interest. Michael Rubin left because their children waiting for them. But we have another special guest here. He is a freedom fighter. He was working in, can you tell about him? But this is our guest that we will listen to from him very soon. We are at the very soon we'll finish this seminar, but another two guests we have. Go ahead.
Now I'll request Mr. Jamal Hussain to say something.
Yeah, and can you tell about him
Yeah,
one more time?
it's he's Mr. Greg Rashford, who worked for U.S. Congress in support of 1971 independence, and he's a freedom fighter with us.
All right. Before our guest Jamal Hussain come for his with his remark, I would like to, by very short, one of our supporter for this this event just send me to say you something. Here is the say. Yeah, we all know that about 2 years ago, a serious injustice was done to Bangladesh, a rising nation in South Asia, the country's largest political party, which led 1971 Liberation War, and its leader, who guided nation for 15 years with notable achievement, were removed from power through coordinated conspiracy. By such event today, what happening and continuously will happen, and we will support always. Mr. Dastagir Jahangir wrote by Dr. Physician Shah Giyas Uddin from New York. Thank you so much, Mr. Jamal Hassan.
Okay, I don't know exactly how long I can speak, but I want to be very brief. Actually, I worked in the Middle East and with the DoD as a counter-intel expert. So I dealt with many local workers from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and many other third world countries. Anyway, Michael Rubin, my associate, he covered certain aspects in today's seminar, and I would not elaborate more, but I can only tell you important thing. democracy and theocracy cannot coexist peacefully. In fact, theocracy is antithesis of democracy. And we all know radical Islam comes from political Islam. In South Asian region, violent Sunni radical Islam manifested in 1971. And apparently now the so-called moderate Muslim party, Jamaat-e-Islami, which was announced by at least 2 US ambassadors in Bangladesh, I think Harry Thomas and Marian Peters, both of them termed Jamaat-e-Islami as a peaceful moderate party, which is not. This party, I call it a radical jihadi with a stealth outfit. More or less, it's a stealth jihadist party because normally it doesn't act like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but it's a facilitator of global jihad. I would say Jamaat-e-Islam has spider web connection with many of the violent extremist jihadists all over the world. If we go back even to Bangladesh theater, you will see Ansarullah Bangla team, which was our subject matter in the Middle East, where I worked with the DoD. Ansarullah Bangla team, then JMB, New JMB, those were my subject matter. That means American Department of Defense that time were researching on these violent Islamist groups. Unfortunately, now State Department officials cannot see it that way. They think that Jamaat-e-Islami will bring peace, liberty, and democracy in this overly populated country. It will not happen so. Jamaat-e-Islami, already one of my associates, I think Zia Karim, mentioned that in America, they got the connection with a group like Muslim Ummah of North America. Not only that, unfortunately, Islamic Circle of North America, ICNA, Islamic Society of North America, these or even CARE. If you go down the street of more researching, you will see ICNA, ISNA, CARE, they are all tied to Jamaat. In this building, 15 years ago maybe, there was a conference, and many of those outfits that Western bound, I can say US-based Islamic organizations, they were voicing against the war crime trial in Bangladesh. At the time, Sheikh Hasina was the prime minister, and the Bangladesh International Crimes Tribunal launched the trial. So my point is, why ICNA, ISNA, CARE, or MUNA has so much headache? What's happening in Bangladesh? Okay, before I end up, I want to tell you one thing. In America, we are hearing that very soon Muslim Brotherhood might be banned. Muslim Brotherhood has tentacles in academia. We have got Muslim Student Association. Not only that, we have Islamic preachers. During the July upheaval of 2024, I will give 3 examples. Omar Suleiman, Palestinian American living in Dallas, Texas, apparently a peaceful preacher, preaching Islamic ideology. He doesn't have any problem with the Iranian regime's atrocity against the people. He never voiced anything. He was silent about the people's revolution in Iran. Muhammad Hijab in UK. Another guy, another Islamist from UK. And not only that, Mr. Tanvir Chaudhry, Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is the mouthpiece of Qatari royal family. We know Al Jazeera is an Islamist entity. This Mr. Tanvir Chaudhry, on his Facebook page in July, he reposted a statement by Sarji Salam, where Sarji Salam basically asking rank and file of the army to revolt against the army officers. My point, $1 million question is, Omar Suleiman, the Islamic preacher in Dallas, in his statement in July, he was asking for quote-unquote ouster of fascist Hasina. Why Muhammad Hijab of England was so much worried about Sheikh Hasina? The point is simple. Global Islamists / jihadists had one motive to kick out the Army League-led government. Why? Is it because of Salman F. Rahman's loan defaulting? Is it because of MS Alam's money laundering or whatever million of dollars? No. This type of corruption in many societies we see, it's very common. In many dictatorship in Middle East, we see this is nothing. No, the Islamists were upset because Sheikh Hasina dared to prosecute Jamaati war criminals. So Sheikh Hasina, not only the war crime trial, Sheikh Hasina also combated the JMB Ansarullah Bangla team. So what we can see the spider web. So unfortunately, many Western analysts don't see that there was a bigger conspiracy by the global jihadists to topple Sheikh Hasina-led government. Here I end my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jamal Hassan.
Jamal bhai, before let you go, because he mentioned one of the names that he forgot to mention is Yasir Khan. He was the one who giving a speech in Philadelphia. Then after July, give the similar. He was invited by Shri.
Another character in the web.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jia bhai.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
And these were in the days when Congress was bipartisan on foreign policy. And I don't know what's going on today at all, but whatever it is must have historical roots. And I would be interested in learning what was going on with the Muslims then in 1970, 71, and now. There has to be a connection, for better or worse. And that's all. And good luck to all. I have no idea the merits of this, except I can see you're all honest and sincere. So thank you.
Thank you indeed.
Let's
Thank
give
you.
him a standing ovation.
Yeah, please, everyone. Thank you, sir. Now we'll have a very maybe 1 minute speech from Dr. Dilip Nath, a human rights activist, is our guest. He is on a phone right now. Dilip Da, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the Institute of Strategic Dialogue and Dr. Jahangir for inviting me to this important discussion. You know, I'd rather be with you in person. Unfortunately, I got stuck here in New York. I was unable to attend today's discussion in person, but I want to thank you
Please,
for at least
your attention, please.
giving me an opportunity to speak virtually. You know, before I present my perspective on holding the national election in Bangladesh without a major political party, Awami League, and what it means from the democratic legitimacy, human rights, and the protection of the minorities. You know, I want to recall one of my favorite presidents, Lyndon B. Johnson. He said, "The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by human beings for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible wall, which imprison people because they are different from others." You know, as we all know, Bangladesh electoral history is complex, involving both democratic and military regime, as well as dominant parties of politics. But political inclusion is vital for building trust and maintaining the stability, especially in a society with a strong political division and history of conflict over representation. You know, as we all know that Awami League has long been one of the source for strength and political landscape in Bangladesh, leading the independence and the most democratic governance movement. And also, if we look at the history, but you know, participatory election are essential for democratic credibility and citizen trust. You know, the competitive and fair inclusive election is also known as the democratic legitimacy. Excluding the Awami League from the national election threatened Bangladesh democratic legitimacy, human rights protection, and safety of the minority groups. You know, as we all know, since the ouster of Sheikh Hasina government in August 2024, Bangladesh has essentially become a hell house. Under the current illegal government, mob justice has become a norm. Journalists and progressive political leaders are incarcerated almost every single day. In the last
Dilip,
17 months, over 3,500 police officers were hanged and murdered.
Thank you, Dilip Da. Go ahead.
Yeah. And nearly 2,200 religious minority houses and places of worship has been vandalized, burned down, and destroyed by the Islamic jihadists. And this includes 126 innocent Hindus being murdered, including killing of Dipu Das, who was burned alive in a broad daylight in the presence of hundreds of people. And law enforcement has done nothing. Needless to say, religious minorities are only safe in the